Museum Theatre in Greece, Dynamics in Heritage Interpretation, by Nikonanu Niki, Assistant Professor, and Venier Fotini, PhD Candidate, University of Thessaly, Greece. Museum visitors' communication through exhibitions interpretation aims at fulfilling a museum's educational role, as well as at the inclusion of different visitors' groups. In that framework, the Museum Education and Research Laboratory researches current museum education practice in Greece and abroad, focusing on different methodologies applied in the context of museum interpretation. An early examination of the research field uncovered the need to examine museum theatre's potential in museum education. Museum theatre is a field significantly under-researched both in Greece and abroad. First stage of research included secondary research in order to define museum theatre characteristics, as well as to clarify research questions as follows. Museum theatre is a communication strategy capable of engaging new and different visitor groups in the museum. It can also be used as a remarkable point of reference for the museum, shaping a more familiar relation between the museum and its visitors, and enriching the museum's variety of events. Moreover, museum theatre applications include entertainment, making museums more competitive in the leisure industry. Is museum theatre able to engage new audiences and thus make museums more attractive in order to approach different social and age groups? Museum theatre is also an educational methodology easily adaptable to the constructivist learning model, as well as to the multiple intelligences theory. Both learning theories are adopted by a growing number of museums worldwide. Museum theatre animates the inanimate, and it is able to throw light on or fill gaps in the partial knowledge offered by the exhibition. It also provides opportunities for multiple narratives, insights, and posing questions about the subject matter of a museum exhibition, putting the learner at the center of the museum experience. In what ways does the audience engage in the interpretation process? Has museum theatre the ability to offer multiple narratives and challenge museum's authority? Museum theatre puts emphasis on visitors' experience by trying to combine education and entertainment, but is it able to efficiently support the function of the museum as a place for experience, learning, and entertainment? The paper presents results of the first phase of a research project focusing on the recent use of LARP as a museum theatre form in Greek museum education. But what is a LARP? LARP is a kind of pretend play studied through different fields of research such as game theory, performance studies, psychology, and education. Nevertheless, so far no research has been detected on the educational use of LARPs in museums, so we will be glad for any contribution. Live-action role-playing games stem from the tradition of role-playing games, or RPGs, that appeared in the 70s in the game industry, and are popular mainly among teenagers. RPGs moved from subculture to mainstream culture due to their ability to adapt in different settings. Role-playing games are an idiosyncratic form. In game studies, role-playing games are classified as a limit case or borderline cases because they don't fit, for several reasons, the definition of a game. Their origin is traced back in the beginning of the 20th century into Moreno's psychodrama, and they are even connected with 17th to 18th centuries European carousels too, a form of live role-play often performed at the European courts. Many RPG techniques also overlap with drama techniques. Thus, its relation to theatre, especially for LARP, seems quite intrinsic. RPG can be described as a game in which participants adopt the role of imaginative characters, and through mutual cooperation they create or watch stories. The participants act according to the restrictions imposed by their role, and their success or fail depends on certain rules and guidelines communicated to players, usually by a game master and rarely by the players themselves. Through a process based on achieving several targets, players work as a group in order to fulfill their mission. Players' decisions form the course of the game. There are no winners or losers, just an interactive process of defining and redefining an imaginary game world, done by a group of participants according to a recognized structure of power. As stated in Drudson and Hitson, main components of RPG are the following: game world, participants, characters, game master, interaction, and narrative. Role-playing games appear in many variations. The term live-action role-playing games, which is being researched in the present paper because of its implementation in museums, is used in order to describe role-playing games that are played physically by the participants and therefore acquire dramatic characteristics. LARP appear in many variations too, from games going on for months among several participants to short-duration programs for a small number of participants. LARP has also been used for exploring political and social issues in an historical interpretation context. They are used for educational purposes too, even as the main methodology for school curriculum. LARP in an educational context can be distinguished in full-scale games, functionality play, and teacher role-play. Full-scale LARP is very demanding. Many learning goals can be achieved in the preparation of the LARP and evaluation afterwards. Functionality play is less demanding. Groups of pupils are given distinct functions. They are not required to develop individual identity, though this may occur naturally. Usually pupils define themselves as a group and act collectively. Teacher role-play resembles the pedagogical drama method, where the teacher assumes a character role in which pupils can ask questions and interact with the role-playing teacher. The pupils, however, are also expected to assume a function role and react through that role. Research framework. The use of LARP in museum education in Greece was introduced in 2007 by LARP players who approached successfully the Museum of Byzantine Culture in Thessaloniki in order to play with museum visitors, as they believed that the museum's historical authenticity would make the game even more fascinating. This cooperation led the LARP players to the establishment of the Gamecraft Company, which in subsequent years worked with several museums in the development of educational activities. The company has also implemented educational LARPs in open-air sites and cultural centers. Moreover, Gamecraft enjoys a constant presence in two museums in northern Greece, the Museum of Byzantine Culture and the Folklife and Ethnological Museum of Macedonia Thrace, both situated in Thessaloniki. According to Gamecraft, they have so far implemented over 40 original LARPs for museums, open-air sites and cultural centers. In order to explore LARP's application in museum settings, specific research questions were addressed concerning the institutional framework, LARP's integration in the museum's communicative and educational policy, as well as the issues concerning the institutions and companies' cooperation in LARP's design and implementation. The formal content of LARP as an educational program in a museum setting focusing on the following aspects: scenario, museum objects, contents, use of the museum space, and forms of communication, interaction between the interpreter and the visitor. For the investigation of the above questions, primary research was conducted, as the relevant literature, at least as regards the use of LARPs in museums, is extremely limited. More specifically, qualitative research included participant observation of LARP applications, semi-structured interviews with members of the educational department of the two museums, which host such games on a permanent basis, as well as with members of the Gamecraft Company. For a better understanding of the visitor's experience, the Museum Education and Research Laboratory plans to expand the research by adding visitors' focus groups in the next research phase. Research results. According to the research results, museums' educational departments, which is the main contact department for Gamecraft, faced the introduction of LARP as a way of enriching their educational activities. In this context, LARPs focused on expanding audience groups with adults and families, as well as secondary school groups. Particular emphasis was placed on innovation, as Gamecraft introduced a new methodology on approaching museum objects, so the visitors had the chance to experience the museum in a different and more enjoyable way, learn by participating and not just listening, and enjoy a trip in the past. LARPs were introduced both as a part of celebration events and leisure programs, as well as of the permanent educational programs addressed to school groups. LARP's promotion didn't differentiate from the museum's established promotional procedure of educational programs that include leaflets, newsletters, sent to the museum contacts by email, and social media. Gamecraft Company also promotes museum LARPs through its own network of contacts. According to the museum's educational department, the introduction of LARPs helped attract adults and families, a new target group for the museum. On the contrary, LARP targeted at school groups was not so successful, maybe because of the fact that teachers weren't familiar with this kind of activity. Public response is significantly encouraging when LARPs addressed to adults and families, while in the case of school groups is much more limited. People are generally excited because it is something different and new. They are not used to go to the museum and do something, involve themselves. Usually they are visitors, especially adults, who have never before been involved in a museum activity. And kids get excited too. Regarding the cooperation between museums and Gamecraft, it was important to investigate the educational planning process, in particular the creation of the script, as the core of the whole educational process that seeks to integrate scientific information in a fictional context and the possibility of deviations from the official and scientifically documented museum narrative. According to the results, the design is based on the continuous and intensive collaboration between the museum and the Gamecraft company. From a museum's perspective, responsibility for this cooperation is undertaken mainly by the educational department, as these actions are part of the educational programming of museums. On a second level, specialists from the collections department are involved in order to provide specialized information for the script. Sometimes the conservation department also provides replica for hands-on activities during the game. Museums provide specific requirements in terms of defining the exhibition contents and thus greatly in terms of exhibits selected. They provide also scientific information, and the members of the Gamecraft have to attend some training about the contents of the museum exhibition. Subsequently, Gamecraft forms the first script, which is then checked for its scientific validity by the museum professionals. Pilot LARP implementations with museum professionals as players are considered essential for any corrections or closing remarks. Museum intervention focuses primarily on the scientific part, the historical content, and not on the plot. The scientific validity check is a process that often involves repeat controls and corresponding corrections. According to the museum professional, the museum was quite intrusive in terms of content. Museums consider this process as a necessity that permits them to have full control of the contents and the narrative delivered within their premises and under their responsibility. Gamecraft seems to be seeking this test so as the final result is consistent with the scientific validity of the museum. As the Museum of Byzantine Culture Education Department stated, they know how to tell a story to the people, but we have the historical knowledge. They may tell nice stories in an appealing way, but they may not be scientifically accurate. Although the museum seems to maintain authority, this cooperation appears very successful to both sides. As stated by Gamecraft, curators can provide very important information we could not find on our own. Nevertheless, they express their concern. The first day I have terrible anxiety about the exhibits. I'm afraid I will have to give an answer on something I ignore. Concerning the use of the museum space, the institution doesn't intend to make any changes in order to support LARP design or visitors' comfort. Educational material, though, usually in the form of museum objects replicas, or materials for the demonstration of techniques, is provided to GameCraft. Format content. Form encompasses the structural elements in LARP design, while content refers to the ideas and themes communicated to visitors. Format content, though, intermingles in the creation of the LARP experience. LARP addresses the organized group of visitors. The form of LARP can be described as follows. Upon arrival of the visitors group, a person from the Museum Education Department offers them a brief introduction into the game. The Game Master follows in introducing the group into the theme of the game. He explains them the case and assumes roles for the participants. Participants form one single group with common aims, and guided by one or more than one Game Master, they examine selected museum objects in various museum rooms in order to fulfill their mission. Though the use of costumes in LARP is considered by GameCraft as an important element in participants' immersion into the game, and is also a participant's request from time to time, financial limitations do not allow such a cost to be added to the program's budget. GameCraft designs LARPs in such a way that participants can have an overview of the museum space. Restrictions include the simultaneous presence of a large number of visitors, apart from games participants, as well as the fact that sometimes museum objects included in the plot for observation cannot be easily observed by the whole group of participants simultaneously. Nevertheless, such limitations are rare in the implementation of LARP in heritage sites. LARP's duration cannot exceed 1.5 hours, as there are usually several LARPs taking place during the day, and time schedule has to remain strict. A moderator is in charge of synchronizing the flow of the visitors' groups. LARP's content is inspired by historical narratives documented in the museum, while historical accuracy is of great importance both by GameCraft and the museum. Usually, the game's plot is a mystery that has to be solved, or the decoding of an object, while characters can be either from the present or from the past. No real characters are assigned as roles to the participants. Participants face dilemmas and they have to make choices, though the extent to which they can alter the pre-designed plot of the game is significantly limited for safety reasons regarding GameCraft's maintenance of control over the game. As far as it concerns participants' response during the game, GameCraft stated that they don't face a problem in slipping into the role. This statement, though, will be tested further in the second research stage. Nevertheless, the script follows a dramatic structure, with inspiration moments, moments of surprise, narrative twists, and dramatic climax, aiming to provoke an emotive and cognitive response to visitors. Strict guidelines in museum objects approach leads to the creation of a predetermined plot with few options for a participant-driven narrative. In-depth dialogue with the participants, as well as a debriefing, is not included in game's content. Conclusions. Research results provided some important insights in the function of LARP in Greek museums. LARPs became part of the communication policy of the museum as an innovative idea to attract. Nevertheless, museums' promotional activities didn't extend in order to reach potential visitor groups, but museums' collaboration with GameCraft did offer an augmented dissemination of the program. Public response to LARP in museums vary depending on the conditions of implementation and different audiences and lessen the scenario, as in all cases it appears to have similar characteristics. Notably, the inclusion of new visitors concerned adults and families rather than school groups. Additionally, LARP seems to be more successful when it is part of leisure programs, weekend events, or celebration activities. An important element is the close collaboration between the museum and GameCraft in order to create the script, as it shows willingness to interact and exchange expertise. The mutual difficulty concerned from both sides regarding the scientific validity that must be maintained within the fictional element of the scenario is central to the overall development of the educational activity. As a result, dramatic elements do play a crucial role in games design, while the museum space remains intact. This very fictionality, though, helps to highlight the constructedness of many of the museum narratives. The use of LARP in Greek museums in an educational context resembles more functionality games, as the time limit of educational activities does not permit the development of a full-scale LARP, and it addresses to a group rather than to individuals. Similarities to teacher role play, which is also considered as a usual technique in drama education, are obvious. LARP includes the structural elements, active participation, and visitors' motivation to engage in the program. Fear of scientific inaccuracy by both the company and the institution, as well as the programming of the event, significantly limits the potential of LARP to allow multiple narratives and questioning on possible issues raised. Museums, while open to innovative ideas, hold a strict guideline in maintaining control over their narratives. LARP's implementation in museums, though, as proved in other educational uses of LARP, has the potential not only to engage visitors, but also to promote critical thinking, to raise and deal with controversial issues. It would be interesting to see whether their development in the museum field will be able to exploit these capabilities, contributing to an opening of the museum not only to new groups of visitors, but also to new forms of dialogue on museum narratives. We also hope that present research on LARP will be further enriched by participants' opinions in the next research phase. Thank you.